A true story of grief, love, and chosen family across species. The Kenyan savanna stretched endlessly under a merciless October sun, its red earth cracked like the surface of an ancient heart. Elephants, those colossal gray-skinned sages of the wild, moved through the acacia-dotted landscape with a grace that belied their size. Among Earth's most emotionally intelligent creatures, they possessed a self-awareness so profound that they recognized their own reflections in mirrors, a rarity shared only with humans, great apes and dolphins. They mourned their dead with rituals that could last days, gathering in silent circles, draping trunks over fallen kin, touching bones long after flesh had faded. They formed bonds that spanned lifetimes, remembering the faces of those they loved and the exact places where tragedy had struck, carrying grief in their massive hearts the way humans carry photographs in wallets. It was this depth of feeling, this capacity to love so fiercely and grieve so completely, that set the stage for a story that would unfold on a scorching morning in the heart of Amboseli, a story that would prove love could transcend species, loss, and even death itself. Wildlife veterinarian Elena Rivers was in the middle of cataloging medical supplies at the reserve's field station when her radio crackled to life. The message was brief, clinical, and devastating. Adult female elephant deceased near Amboseli watering hole. Approximately 18-month-old calf refusing to leave the body. Situation critical. Immediate response required. Elena's hands froze over the antiseptic bottles. She knew what this meant. She had seen it before. Calves so bonded to their mothers that they would stand vigil until predators arrived or starvation claimed them. But this time, something deeper stirred in her chest. 3 months earlier, she had received a similar midnight call about her own mother. Cancer, sudden decline, hospital bed, too late. The parallel hit like a physical blow. She grabbed her emergency kit, whistled sharply, and her border collie Scout, 9 years old, black and white, with eyes that seemed to understand the language of sorrow, leaped into the dusty Land Cruiser beside her. She drove faster than regulations allowed, tires kicking up plumes of red dust, knowing every minute counted not just for the calves' physical survival, but for any chance of reaching her before grief calcified into something permanent and fatal. 40 minutes later, the scene that greeted her would be burned into her memory like a brand. The adult female lay on her side in the golden grass, her massive body still and peaceful beneath the shade of thorn trees, as if she had simply lain down to rest and never risen. Flies buzzed lazily around her, and the air carried the first faint scent of decay. But it was the baby standing beside her that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. No bigger than a large dog, the calf had her trunk draped across her mother's head, pressing and pushing with increasing desperation, as if trying to wake her from a sleep that would never end. Her small ears, still comically oversized for her young body, flapped frantically as she circled the form, touching the face, the side, the legs, searching for any sign of life, any warmth, any response. Her movements were frantic, mechanical, heartbreaking. When Elena stepped out of the vehicle, the calf looked up. Their eyes met across the 20 yards of sun-baked earth, and for a moment time stopped. The baby's gaze held an ancient sadness, a depth of loss that number 18-month-old should know. Elena felt it like a mirror, two mothers who had lost their worlds, staring at each other across the divide of species. She had looked into the eyes of grieving elephants before, but never like this. Never with her own heart still raw and bleeding. At Armies of the Past, we share these profound moments because they remind us that love, grief, and family exist far beyond the human experience. If these stories of extraordinary animal bonds touch your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every new subscriber helps us continue sharing these powerful tales and strengthens our community dedicated to celebrating the remarkable emotional lives of Earth's most incredible creatures. Now let us continue with Amara's story. Dr. James Kenyatta, the reserve's head veterinarian, arrived 10 minutes after Elena. A tall man in his mid-50s with kind eyes that had seen too much death in the wild. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed this grim duty countless times. 2 rangers flanked him, their faces grim. James knelt beside the fallen female, running experienced hands over her flank, checking for signs of injury or illness. "Sudden heart failure," he said quietly, standing and brushing dust from his knees. Likely an underlying condition we'd never have caught. She's been dead 3, maybe 4 hours at most. That gives us a narrow window. He turned to the calf, who had returned to nudging her mother's ear with her trunk, making small, distressed sounds, high-pitched trumpets that cracked in the middle like a child's sob. "We need to move the baby now," James said, his voice heavy with the weight of necessity. "Within hours, predators will smell the body. Lions, hyenas, they'll come, and that little one will defend her mother until they tear her apart too." Elena's hands gripped the warm metal of the Land Cruiser door so tightly her knuckles went white. "If we tranquilize her, she'll wake up traumatized and alone. She's already lost everything. I will not let her wake up thinking she's been attacked too." James nodded slowly, understanding the ethical dilemma. He had the authority to order the dart gun regardless of her objections. He was head veterinarian after all, but he also knew Elena's history. 3 months ago, she had buried her mother. He had seen her at the funeral, hollow-eyed, moving through the motions like a ghost. This wasn't just about the calf for her. "Then what do you suggest?" he asked. "We can't wait for her to decide to leave. She won't. Elephants mourn Elena. You know this. She could stay here for days." Before Elena could answer, Scout jumped down from the back of the Land Cruiser and began walking toward the calf with the confident ease of a dog who had spent his entire life around wildlife. Elena's hand shot out instinctively. "Scout, no." But something made her pause. Scout wasn't approaching aggressively. His body language was completely relaxed. Tail in a neutral position, head slightly lowered in submission, ears relaxed. He had been trained for search and rescue since he was a puppy, had helped locate injured animals across half of Kenya, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to read what other creatures needed in their darkest moments. The little elephant watched him approach, her trunk raised defensively, ears spread wide to make herself look bigger. But she didn't charge. She didn't trumpet. Scout stopped about 15 feet away and simply sat down in the grass, his black and white coat stark against the golden savanna. He didn't stare at her directly. He didn't make any sudden movements. He just existed in the same space with a patience that seemed to communicate. "I understand. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to wait." Minutes passed, 5, then 10, then 15. The calf lowered her trunk slightly, still watching the dog, still touching her mother periodically, but no longer in full panic mode. Her movements slowed. Her ears relaxed a fraction. "That's remarkable," James whispered, standing beside Elena now. "I've never seen anything like that." Elena felt an idea forming. Desperate, unconventional, but possibly their only chance. "James, what if we don't force her? What if we let Scout lead her away naturally?" "Lead her," James repeated, eyebrows raised. "Elena, she's not going to just follow a dog away from her mother." "Maybe not immediately," Elena agreed, her mind racing through logistics. "But Scout has a gift. Animals trust him. If we give her time, if Scout starts moving slowly and she follows even a few steps, we can work with that. It might take hours, but it's better than the trauma of darting her." James looked at the calf, then at Scout, then back at Elena. As head veterinarian, he could overrule her. But he also knew that Elena had lost her mother just 3 months ago, that perhaps she understood this baby's grief in ways he never could. He glanced at the sun, already high and brutal. "You have until sunset," he said finally. "If she's not clear of this area by then, we sedate her. For her own safety." "Agreed," Elena said, relief and determination flooding her voice. She spent the next hour simply observing. She moved the Land Cruiser to a respectful distance, set up a portable shade structure, and watched as Scout maintained his patient vigil. The calf would move away from her mother occasionally, walking in small, confused circles, then return to push at the massive body again with her trunk, each time with less force, as if hope were slowly draining. Each time she moved, Scout would stand up, take a few casual steps in the opposite direction from the body, then sit down again. He wasn't leading her away overtly, just creating a pattern of movement that suggested direction without pressure. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was working. By noon, the October heat was brutal, shimmering off the ground in waves. The calf had followed Scout about 20 yards from her mother before stopping abruptly and turning back. Elena's heart sank. But Scout didn't panic. He simply walked back with her, let her touch her mother again, then repeated the gentle process. It was like watching the world's most patient dance. Each step forward followed by a step back, but with the distance gradually, incrementally increasing. "She's exhausted," Elena said to herself, noting how the calf's movements were becoming slower, less coordinated. The baby had likely not eaten or drunk anything since before her mother died, and dehydration in this heat could kill faster than grief. She filled a large bucket with water from the vehicle's reserve tank and carried it to a point about 30 feet from the body, setting it down before retreating quickly. Scout, understanding somehow, walked to the bucket and began drinking noisily, lapping with exaggerated enthusiasm. The calf watched him, her trunk reaching out into the air as if testing for the scent of water on the breeze. She took one hesitant step toward Scout and the bucket, then stopped, looking back at her mother. Elena held her breath. The internal conflict playing out in that small elephant's mind was visible in every trembling muscle, every flick of her ear. Scout finished drinking and sat beside the bucket, looking at the calf with calm, patient eyes, brown and wise and utterly without judgment. Finally, slowly, the baby walked to the bucket. She dipped her trunk in, drew up water, and sprayed it into her mouth. She drank for a long time. Long, deep pulls that spoke of a body remembering its needs even as the heart resisted. Elena felt tears running down her face, hot against her sun-scorched cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. It was such a small thing, drinking water, but in that moment, watching this baby elephant choose to nourish her body even while her soul was shattered, Elena understood that they had turned a corner. The calf was not healed. She would not be healed for a long time, maybe ever. But she was choosing to continue. And that was everything. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Scout began moving more deliberately. He would walk 20 or 30 paces away from the body, stop, and look back at the calf. If she didn't follow, he would return. But each time, she followed a little farther before stopping and looking back with those heartbreaking distress calls. The rangers had quietly positioned themselves to create a subtle corridor, ensuring that when the calf did move, she would naturally head toward the reserve's temporary holding area rather than deeper into dangerous territory. By the time the sun touched the horizon, painting the savanna in golds and oranges, the calf had followed Scout nearly 200 yards from where her mother lay. She still looked back constantly, still made small sounds of distress, low, rumbling calls that seemed to search for an answer that would never come, but she was moving. She was choosing, however unconsciously, to follow the dog into an unknown future. James approached Elena carefully, his boots crunching softly on the dry grass. "The team will remove the body tonight," he said quietly. "We'll do it with respect. She'll be returned to the earth properly. No scavengers, no disease risk." Elena nodded, unable to speak. She knew it was necessary. Leaving the body would attract every predator within miles and create a health hazard for the herd. But it still felt like a betrayal somehow, this final, irreversible separation. The calf stopped walking and looked back one more time. Her trunk raised high as if trying to catch her mother's scent on the wind one last time. She made a sound that Elena would never be able to adequately describe to anyone. A low, rumbling call that seemed to carry all the grief in the world, a sound that vibrated in Elena's bones and brought fresh tears to her eyes. Scout walked back to stand beside the baby, not touching her, just being there. And somehow that seemed to be enough. The calf lowered her trunk and continued walking, following the black and white dog into the gathering dusk. By nightfall, they had reached the temporary holding area, a cleared section near the reserve's ranger station with access to fresh water, shade, and browse. It wasn't a cage or an enclosure, just a safe space where they could monitor her without confinement. Elena set up her camping gear without discussion, knowing without question that she would not be leaving this elephant tonight, or likely for many nights to come. James had tried to convince her to go home, to let the night staff handle monitoring, but Elena had simply looked at him with eyes still red from crying and said, "Would you leave your child?" He had no answer to that. As darkness settled over the savannah and the Southern Cross emerged bright overhead, Elena sat on her camp chair 20 feet from where the little elephant stood in the starlight. Scout lay nearby, his breathing steady and calm. The calf had not eaten anything, had barely drunk more water, and stood with her head lowered in a posture of absolute defeat, ears drooping, trunk hanging limp, eyes half closed as if she were already halfway to wherever her mother had gone. "I'm going to call you Amara," Elena said softly into the darkness, knowing the elephant couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone carried meaning. "It means eternal, everlasting. Because your mother's love for you will never die, Amara. Even now. Even though she's gone. That love lives in you. I know you don't believe me yet. I know you want to follow her into whatever comes next. But I promise you, little one, life can be beautiful again. Not the same. Never the same. But beautiful in new ways you can't imagine yet." Amara didn't respond. Didn't move. Simply stood like a small gray statue under the infinite stars. And Elena, who had said almost these exact words to herself in the mirror every morning since her own mother died, finally understood why she had been the one to receive that emergency call. Sometimes the universe puts broken things together not to fix them, but so they can learn to be broken in the same space. Until, slowly, day by day, the sharp edges smooth and the pieces begin to fit together in new configurations that resemble something like wholeness. Scout got up, walked over to Elena, and rested his head on her knee. His brown eyes reflected the starlight, wise and ancient. She scratched his ears gently, her fingers trembling. "Thank you for being wiser than all of us," she whispered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow they would have to figure out how to convince a grieving baby elephant that food mattered, that the future mattered, that anything beyond this moment of loss mattered. But tonight, they would simply exist together in their grief. 3 lost souls under the African stars, taking their first small steps toward whatever healing might look like. As Elena finally allowed her eyes to close, her last conscious thought was of Amara standing silent in the darkness, a baby who had chosen to follow a dog away from death without understanding yet that she was walking toward something that might eventually feel like home. The first 48 hours were the hardest. Amara stood in the same spot where she had stopped walking that first night, moving only to drink water when her body demanded it with a desperation that overrode even grief. She refused the fresh acacia leaves Elena cut and laid out carefully each morning. She refused the specialized elephant milk formula that James had sent over in cooled containers, shipped from a sanctuary 3 hours away. She refused even to acknowledge that the world around her existed beyond the empty space where her mother should have been. Scout stayed close, sometimes sitting, sometimes lying down, occasionally getting up to drink or eat his own food, but always returning to maintain his quiet vigil beside the grieving elephant. He didn't push. He didn't play. He just was, a steady breathing anchor in a world that had come unmoored. Elena slept in fits and starts, waking every few hours to check on Amara, to make sure she was still drinking water, to watch for any signs of medical distress beyond the emotional trauma that was plain to see. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, her skin dry and cracked from the sun, but she refused to leave. This was her post now. This was her child. On the second morning, her colleague Mercy arrived with fresh supplies. A woman in her early 40s who had worked in wildlife conservation her entire adult life. Mercy took one look at Elena's exhausted face and immediately set to work without a word. She unpacked solar panels, set up a more substantial camp structure with a proper sleeping tent, organized food supplies, and made strong coffee over the portable stove. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had built 100 camps in 100 wild places. "She hasn't eaten anything?" Mercy asked quietly, watching Amara from a respectful distance. "Nothing," Elena confirmed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug of coffee like it was a lifeline. "She drinks water, but only the minimum. I've tried everything. Fresh acacia leaves, wild grass, even brought in some of the specialized calf nutrition blocks from the sanctuary. She won't touch any of it." Mercy was silent for a moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. Then she said something that surprised Elena. My grandmother used to say that grief must be fed before hunger can return. Maybe she's still feeding her grief. It was such a simple observation, spoken in Mercy's soft, melodic accent, but it shifted something fundamental in Elena's perspective. She had been so focused on getting nutrition into Amara, on solving the immediate physical problem, that she had forgotten the emotional one. Maybe the baby didn't need food yet. Maybe she needed something else first. Permission. Permission to grieve fully before being asked to move forward. That afternoon, Elena changed her approach. Instead of placing food near Amara and hoping she would eat it, Elena simply sat in her camp chair and talked. She told Amara about her own mother, about the phone call that had come in the middle of the night, about driving to the hospital knowing she was already too late, about the strange emptiness that follows loss, how the world keeps spinning when it should stop, how people expect you to return to normal when normal no longer exists. She spoke in a low, steady voice, not expecting Amara to understand the words, but trusting that tone and presence mattered. Scout lay between them, his head on his paws, seeming to understand that something important was happening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to play. He just provided a living bridge between human and elephant grief. The worst part, Elena said, her voice cracking slightly, was waking up each morning and forgetting for just a second that she was gone. That moment when reality crashes back. It's like losing her all over again. Every single day. Amara's trunk moved slightly, the first voluntary movement beyond drinking water in 2 days. The small elephant turned her head toward Elena, and for the first time they made real eye contact. Elena felt something pass between them, some wordless acknowledgement that they were speaking the same language now, the language of mothers lost too soon. As the sun set on the 3rd day, painting the sky in fiery reds and purples, Amara walked, not far, just a few steps, to where a pile of fresh acacia leaves lay in the shade. She didn't eat them, but she touched them with her trunk, exploring the texture, the scent, as if remembering what food even was. Scout stood up and walked over to his own food bowl, crunching his kibble with deliberate loudness. Amara watched him, her head tilted slightly in what might have been curiosity. Elena held her breath, not daring to move or speak. And then, slowly, so slowly it almost seemed imaginary, Amara picked up a single acacia leaf with her trunk and placed it in her mouth. She chewed mechanically, without enthusiasm, but she chewed, and swallowed, and reached for another leaf. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Such a small thing, eating something every creature does without thinking, but in that moment, watching this baby elephant choose to nourish her body even while her heart was broken, Elena understood that they had turned a corner. Amara was not healed. She would not be healed for a long time, maybe ever. But she was choosing to continue. And that was everything. The days that followed developed a rhythm, slow and deliberate, like the heartbeat of the savannah itself. Each morning, Elena would wake at dawn to find Amara already awake, standing and watching the sunrise with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something beyond the horizon. Perhaps her mother's spirit in the light, perhaps just the shape of a world that still made sense. Scout would greet the morning with a full-body stretch and enthusiastic tail wag. His joy for each new day a stark contrast to Amara's quiet sorrow. Elena would prepare breakfast for all 3 of them, oats and fruit for herself, kibble for Scout, fresh browse and milk formula for Amara. And they would eat together in a small circle, an unlikely family bound by circumstance and loss. Amara began to eat more regularly, though she remained painfully thin. Her small frame seemed even smaller without the bulk that proper nutrition provided, and Elena carefully monitored her health, checking temperature with a rectal thermometer, examining her skin for cracks or infections, watching how she moved for any signs of illness beyond the grief that still shadowed her every step. James visited every few days, bringing supplies and offering medical advice, but mostly just sitting quietly and observing the strange dynamic that was developing between woman, dog, and elephant. "I've never seen anything quite like this," he admitted on one visit, watching Scout and Amara walking side by side toward the watering area. "The calf is bonding to your dog as if he were another elephant." No, Elena said, pride evident in her voice. Scout has always been special. Even I didn't expect this. Watch how he adjusts his pace to match hers. How he stops when she stops. Explores when she explores. He's teaching her how to be curious again. And Scout was teaching her, whether intentionally or not. When he discovered an interesting hole in the ground and stuck his nose in to investigate, Amara would watch with her trunk raised, processing this strange behavior. When he found a puddle of water and splashed in it playfully, Amara's ears would flick forward with something that might have been the beginning of interest. When he rolled on his back in the grass with pure, unadulterated joy, Amara made a sound that was almost like the beginning of a laugh. 2 weeks after the rescue, Amara did something that made Elena's heart soar. Scout had been playing with a fallen log, pushing it with his nose and barking encouragingly. Amara walked over and pushed it with her trunk. Scout barked again and pushed it back toward her. Amara pushed it again, harder this time, and suddenly, without any conscious decision, they were playing. Scout would move the log. Amara would steal it back with her trunk. Scout would chase after it, and around they went in a clumsy, joyful dance that sent dust flying and filled the air with the sound of barking and soft elephant rumbles. Elena grabbed her phone and filmed a few seconds of it, then stopped. She didn't want to document the moment. She wanted to live it. Amara was still grieving. Her movements still carried sadness, and she still had moments where she would stop everything and make those low, searching calls that seemed to reach across the veil between worlds. But she was also, in small ways, beginning to remember how to be a baby elephant, how to be playful, how to find joy in simple things. The breakthrough with the mud came during the 4th week. The rainy season was beginning to tease at its arrival, and a sudden afternoon shower turned the dry earth into a patchwork of puddles. One particularly large puddle formed near their camping area, dark and inviting. Scout, who had been napping in the shade, jumped up and immediately ran to it, splashing and rolling with absolute delight. He emerged looking like a completely different dog. His black and white coat now uniformly brown, and shook vigorously, spraying mud everywhere. Then he ran toward Amara and shook again, spattering her legs with droplets. Amara's trunk shot up in surprise, and for a moment, Elena thought she might retreat. But then something amazing happened. Amara walked deliberately to the puddle, looked down at the dark water and mud mixture, and stepped in. At first, she just stood there, all 4 feet in the shallow puddle, as if testing the sensation. Then she lowered herself to her knees. Then she rolled onto her side with a tremendous splash that sent water flying everywhere. Scout barked with excitement and jumped back into the puddle with her, and suddenly there was mud and water and elephant and dog everywhere. A glorious, chaotic mess of play and life and rediscovered joy. Elena laughed out loud, a sound she hadn't made much of in recent months. She grabbed her old field camera and took pictures, not for any scientific purpose, but because she wanted to remember this moment forever. The moment when Amara chose not just to survive but to play. To cover herself in mud like any normal elephant calf should. To remember that the world could still be fun, even when your heart was broken. That night, as they sat around the small campfire Elena had built, Amara did something unprecedented. She walked over to where Elena sat in her chair and gently rested her muddy trunk on Elena's lap. Just rested it there, making physical contact with a human for the first time since the rescue. Elena froze, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever spell was being woven. Scout, lying beside Elena's feet, didn't react, as if this was always meant to happen. "Hello, sweet girl," Elena whispered slowly, carefully reaching out to touch the trunk with her fingertips. The skin was rough and warm and impossibly alive. "You are doing so well. Your mother would be so proud of you." Amara's trunk tightened slightly around Elena's wrist. Not painfully, just a gentle squeeze that felt like acknowledgement, like understanding, like the beginning of trust. They stayed like that for a long time as the fire crackled and the African night filled with its symphony of sounds. A woman who had lost her mother, a dog who had given his whole heart to helping heal others, and a baby elephant who was learning that family could be built from the rubble of loss. The following weeks brought steady progress, measured not in dramatic leaps but in small, cumulative victories. Amara began to range further from the immediate camp area, exploring the acacia groves and grasslands with Scout as her constant companion. She learned to use her trunk with increasing skill, picking up objects and investigating them, using it to scratch herself, to grab Elena's shirt sleeve playfully when she wanted attention. She gained weight, her thin frame filling out as her appetite returned fully. She even began to make contented rumbling sounds, different from the searching calls of early grief, sounds that spoke of something like happiness beginning to take root. Elena documented everything in her field journal, not as clinical observations but as love letters to a process she had never imagined being part of. She wrote about the morning Amara figured out how to spray water on Scout from the waterhole, drenching him until he looked like a drowned rat and shook himself in mock outrage. She wrote about the evening Amara fell asleep with her head resting on Scout's side, the two of them snoring in harmony under the stars. She wrote about her own healing happening in parallel, how caring for this orphaned elephant was teaching her how to care for herself again, how to find purpose in the midst of pain. But as Amara grew stronger and more confident, Elena knew they were approaching a reckoning. Amara was meant to be with other elephants. She needed the complex social structure of a herd, the teaching that only other elephants could provide, the preparation for a wild life that no human, no matter how devoted, could offer. Elena had always known this day would come. She just hadn't expected it to hurt quite so much. One evening, as Mercy visited with more supplies, she sat with Elena by the fire and spoke the truth they both knew was coming. "You've done something incredible here," Mercy said, her voice gentle but firm. "But she needs more than we can give her. She needs elephants." "I know," Elena said, watching Amara and Scout playing their nightly game of chase around the camp. Amara lumbering after the dog with surprising speed, Scout darting just out of reach. "I've been avoiding thinking about it, but I know. She's almost 2 years old now. In the wild, she'd still be with her mother, learning from the herd. I can't be her herd. There's a sanctuary," Mercy continued, "about 3 hours north. Mama Tembo runs it. She has a matriarch there named Injeri who lost her own calf last year. They specialize in integrating orphaned elephants. I spoke with Mama Tembo about Amara's situation, and she thinks Injeri might accept her." Elena felt her throat tighten. She knew Mama Tembo by reputation. Everyone in wildlife conservation in Kenya did. She was a legend, a woman who had dedicated 40 years to elephant welfare, and had an almost mystical ability to match orphan calves with surrogate mothers. If Mama Tembo thought there was a chance, then there was hope. But it also meant the beginning of goodbye. "How would we do this?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's bonded to Scout. Me. How do we explain to her that she has to leave?" Mercy reached over and squeezed Elena's hand, the same way Elena's mother used to when she was a child and afraid. "The same way your mother would want you to keep living after she was gone. You don't explain. You just love her enough to let her have the life she's meant for." That night, Elena lay in her tent unable to sleep, listening to the sounds of Amara's breathing from just outside. Scout was pressed against her side, having abandoned his usual spot with Amara to offer comfort to his human. He always knew when Elena needed him most. In the morning, she would begin the process of transitioning Amara to the sanctuary. She would start preparing both the elephant and herself for the separation that was coming. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve what hadn't even happened yet, this next loss in a year that had been defined by loss. Outside, Amara made a small sound in her sleep, something between a rumble and a sigh, and Elena, who had learned the language of elephant grief, understood that perhaps Amara was dreaming. Dreaming, she hoped, of mud puddles and play and a black and white dog who had taught her that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Dreaming of a future that was beginning to look possible again. As dawn broke over the savannah, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elena made herself a promise. She would help Amara find her new family. She would do it right, with patience and love and all the care she could offer. But she would not disappear from Amara's life entirely. She would visit. She would maintain that connection. Because some bonds, once formed in the crucible of shared grief, do not break simply because distance intervenes. They stretch, they adapt, but they endure. Just as her mother's love endured beyond death, Elena's love for this little elephant would endure beyond separation. Scout nuzzled her hand, and Elena scratched his ears gratefully. "You are a very good boy," she whispered to him. "The very best boy. And tomorrow we are going to do the hardest thing we've ever done. We are going to teach Amara that she can love more than one family at the same time." The sun climbed higher, and in the golden light of morning, Elena stood and walked outside to where Amara was already awake. Her trunk raised in greeting, her eyes bright with trust. And Elena understood that this was what love looked like sometimes. Not holding on, but holding gently enough that the ones you care for can fly when they're ready, even when their flying means your own heart stays earthbound and aching. The drive to the sanctuary took longer than expected. Not because of distance, but because every 30 minutes, Elena had to pull over and let Amara and Scout out of the specialized transport trailer to walk around, to drink water, to simply breathe. Amara had never been in a vehicle before, and despite Elena's best efforts to make it comfortable, with padding, hay, and familiar scents, the young elephant was anxious. She made low, rumbling calls that resonated through the metal walls, calls that Scout answered with small whines of reassurance from the passenger seat of the Land Cruiser. Elena drove slowly on the dusty roads that wound through the Kenyan countryside, past villages where children ran out to wave at the unusual convoy, past acacia forests where wild elephants might be watching from the shadows, past her own fears about whether she was doing the right thing. Mercy followed behind in a second vehicle with all of Amara's belongings, which was a strange thought when Elena considered it. What belongings did an elephant have? But there were things. The special feeding bucket Amara preferred, the large rubber ball she and Scout played with, the worn canvas tarp that had become her favorite resting spot. Small pieces of a life they had built together over the past 3 months. The sanctuary appeared as the sun reached its highest point, a vast expanse of protected land surrounded by electric fencing that kept the elephants safely in and poachers safely out. The main compound consisted of several simple buildings with corrugated metal roofs, water tanks, feeding stations, and beyond it all, the land itself stretched green and welcoming. As Elena pulled through the main gate, she saw them. Elephants. A small herd of perhaps 12 individuals, ranging from juveniles to mature adults, moving slowly through a grove of fever trees about 300 yards from the compound. Mama Tembo came out to greet them before Elena had even turned off the engine. She was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair cropped short, skin weathered by decades under the African sun, and eyes that seemed to see directly into your soul. She wore practical khaki clothing and sturdy boots and moved with the confident ease of someone completely comfortable in her own skin and purpose. "You must be Elena," Mama Tembo said, her voice warm and rich with a slight accent that spoke of a childhood in the Northern Territories. "And this must be Scout." She bent down to greet the border collie, who approached her with his usual friendly confidence, tail wagging. "I've heard much about you, young man. They say you are a very special dog." "He is," Elena confirmed, stepping out of the vehicle and feeling her legs protest after the long drive. "He saved Amara's life in ways I never could have." Mama Tembo walked to the back of the trailer where Amara was visible through the metal slats, her small face peering out with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The older woman didn't try to touch the young elephant, just stood where Amara could see her clearly and spoke in a low, melodic voice. "Hello, little mother," she said. "Welcome to your new home. I know you are frightened. I know you have lost much. But here we understand loss. Here we build families from the pieces of broken ones. You are safe now." Amara's trunk reached through the slats toward Mama Tembo, not quite touching, just sensing, testing. And Mama Tembo stood perfectly still, allowing the elephant to gather information in her own time and way. After a long moment, she turned back to Elena with a small smile. "She has good energy," she said. "Traumatized, yes. Grieving, certainly. But not broken. You have done well with her." Elena felt tears threaten and pushed them back. "What happens now?" "Now we let her settle," Mama Tembo said, gesturing toward a large paddock area near the compound. She'll stay here for a few days where she can see and smell the herd but not interact yet. Scout can stay with her, and you as well if you wish. We don't rush these things. The elephants will let us know when the time is right. They unloaded Amara into the paddock, which was spacious and equipped with everything she might need. Fresh browse, clean water, shade structures, and soft earth for dust bathing. Scout immediately began exploring the new space, marking it as territory, making it familiar. Amara followed him closely, her trunk almost touching his tail, using his confidence to navigate her own uncertainty. Elena set up a simple camp just outside the paddock fence, determined to stay close for as long as Amara needed her. Mama Tembo brought chai tea in enamel mugs and sat with her as the afternoon stretched toward evening. "Tell me about Njeri," Elena asked, watching the distant herd moving against the golden light. Mama Tembo's expression softened with clear affection. "Njeri is 38 years old. She's been with us for 6 years, ever since her herd was decimated by drought and poaching. She gave birth here 2 years ago to a beautiful female calf, but the baby was born with heart problems we couldn't fix, even with the best veterinary care. She lived only 3 months. Njeri's grief was profound. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't interact with the other elephants, simply stood at the place where her calf died and mourned. How did she recover?" Elena asked quietly. "Time," Mama Tembo said simply. "And purpose. We had a young male orphan brought in, perhaps 6 months old, and Njeri wanted nothing to do with him at first. But slowly, over weeks, she began to allow him near, to tolerate his presence. And then one day, she guided him to the water hole with her trunk. She had become his mother without even realizing it. That little male is now 3 years old and completely devoted to her. She has raised 2 other orphans since then. And Njeri understands what Amara is feeling in ways that go beyond species, beyond language." The next morning, Mama Tembo suggested they bring Amara closer to where the herd typically spent their mornings. They walked slowly, Scout leading the way as always, Amara following with Elena beside her, hand occasionally touching the elephant's rough shoulder for reassurance. The herd was gathered around a large water hole, some drinking, some spraying themselves with water, juveniles playing at the edges while the adults kept watch. As they approached, several elephants looked up, trunks raised, assessing this newcomer. Amara stopped walking suddenly, uncertain. Her body language shifted to defensive, ears spread wide, trying to make herself look bigger and more threatening than she actually was. Scout sat down calmly, and Elena followed his lead, simply stopping and waiting. One elephant separated from the group and began walking toward them. She was large, her tusks long and slightly asymmetrical, her ears showing the tears and scars of a long life. This was Njeri. She moved with deliberate slowness, her trunk extended and swaying gently, her body language completely non-threatening. When she was about 20 feet away, she stopped and simply looked at Amara. The 2 elephants stared at each other across the distance. Amara's defensive posture softened slightly. Njeri made a low rumbling sound, so deep Elena felt it in her chest rather than heard it. Amara responded with a higher-pitched rumble, the elephant equivalent of a question. They were talking, communicating in ways humans could only begin to understand. Njeri took 3 more steps forward. Amara didn't retreat, which Elena took as an encouraging sign. The older elephant's trunk reached out and gently touched Amara's face, then her ears, then moved down to her body, exploring, learning, assessing. It was the exact way a mother elephant would examine a calf, checking for health, for injury, for need. Amara stood completely still, allowing the inspection. Her small body trembled slightly, but she held steady. When Njeri finished, she did something remarkable. She turned her body sideways to Amara, exposing her vulnerable flank, a gesture of complete trust and acceptance. And then she wrapped her trunk gently around Amara's small body and pulled her close. Elena felt her knees go weak. Scout's tail began wagging frantically. Mama Tembo, standing beside Elena, whispered, "She accepts her. Injeri accepts her as her own. But Amara, after a moment pressed against Injeri's side, pulled away. She turned and ran back to Elena and Scout, pressing herself against them, her trunk reaching for Elena's hand. She wasn't rejecting Injeri. Elena understood. She was just not ready to let go of her current family to accept the new one. She wanted both. And she didn't understand yet that she could have both. "This will take time," Mama Tembo said gently. "And Injeri has made her intentions clear. Now Amara must decide to accept them." The days that followed were a delicate dance. Injeri would approach the paddock several times a day, standing just on the other side of the fence, rumbling softly to Amara. Sometimes Amara would approach, and they would touch trunks through the fence, tentative, curious explorations. Other times, Amara would ignore her, choosing instead to play with Scout or follow Elena around the compound. Injeri never pushed, never demanded. She simply offered, consistently and patiently, the promise of elephant family. Elena watched this unfold with a heart split between joy and sorrow. Joy that Amara had a chance at the life she deserved. Sorrow that her own role in Amara's life was shifting, becoming less central, which was exactly as it should be, but still hurt in ways she hadn't anticipated. On the 5th day, Mama Tembo suggested they open the paddock gate during the herd's morning routine and see what Amara would choose. "She needs to make the decision herself," the older woman explained. "We cannot force integration. She must walk through that gate because she wants to, not because we push her." Elena agreed, though her hands shook as she unlatched the gate and swung it open. Amara was at the far end of the paddock with Scout, and she looked up at the sound of the gate moving. She saw the opening. She saw Injeri standing about 50 yards away with the rest of the herd behind her. She saw Elena standing by the gate, trying not to cry. For a long moment nobody moved. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. And then Amara began to walk, not toward Injeri but toward Elena. She came to where Elena stood and wrapped her trunk around the woman's leg, holding on tight. "I know, sweet girl," Elena whispered, kneeling down to press her forehead against Amara's rough skin. "I know it's scary, but I promise you I'm not leaving. Not really. I will visit. I will come see you all the time. But you need to go be with the elephants now. You need to learn how to be the incredible elephant you're meant to become." Scout walked over and pressed against both of them, creating a small circle of comfort. And then he did something extraordinary. He walked toward Injeri, slowly, deliberately, his body language calm and confident. He walked right up to the massive elephant and sat down at her feet, looking back at Amara as if to say, "See? Safe. I'm here. Check for you." Amara watched Scout with her ears forward, processing this information. Scout had never led her wrong. Scout had brought her away from death. Scout had taught her how to play again. The Scout said it was safe, then maybe it was safe. She took one step through the gate. Then another. Then she was walking, slowly but steadily, toward where Scout sat with Injeri. Elena felt Mama Tembo's hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently, offering support. Together, they watched as Amara reached Injeri and Scout. The older elephant lowered her trunk and gently touched the top of Amara's head in a gesture that was unmistakably maternal. Amara leaned into the touch. And then, finally, she allowed Injeri to guide her toward the rest of the herd. The other elephants gathered around, not threateningly, but with curiosity and care. They touched Amara with their trunks, rumbling greetings, welcoming her into the family. A young male about 3 years old, the orphan Mama Tembo had mentioned, seemed particularly excited, bouncing around Amara with the enthusiasm only a juvenile elephant could muster. Scout trotted back to Elena, his job done, looking enormously pleased with himself. "Good boy," Elena managed to say through her tears. "Such a good boy." They stayed at the sanctuary for 2 more weeks, watching as Amara integrated more fully into the herd. She still ran to Elena every evening, still played with Scout, but increasingly, she spent her days within Injeri's orbit and the other elephants. She learned to dust bathe with them, to follow the herd's movements, to communicate in the complex language of elephant society. She was learning to be an elephant, while still maintaining the bond she had formed with her unusual first family. On the day Elena finally had to return to her regular work, she spent the morning with Amara, memorizing everything. The way her trunk curled when she was thinking, the small notch in her left ear from a childhood accident, the exact texture of her skin, the sound of her breathing. She wanted to carry all of it with her. "I will come back in 2 weeks," she promised, holding Amara's face gently between her hands. "And then 2 weeks after that. And I will keep coming back for as long as you want me to. You're not losing me, Amara. You're just gaining more family. Do you understand?" Amara rumbled softly and touched Elena's face with the tip of her trunk, gentle as a kiss. And somehow Elena thought she did understand. The drive away from the sanctuary was one of the hardest things Elena had ever done. Scout sat in the passenger seat with his head on her lap, offering comfort as always. But as they turned onto the main road and the sanctuary disappeared behind them, Elena felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, the loss of her mother, the transition of her role in Amara's life, but there was something else too. Gratitude, purpose, a sense that she had been part of something larger than herself, something that mattered in ways that would ripple forward through time. Over the following months, Elena kept her promise. She visited every 2 weeks, then once a month as her work schedule demanded. Each time, Amara would hear Elena's vehicle before it came into view and would start rumbling excitedly, running to meet her at the gate with Njeri following patiently behind. They would spend the day together, the 4 of them, Elena and Scout and Amara and Njeri, an impossible family that somehow worked. Elena watched Amara grow from a traumatized baby into a confident young elephant. She saw her learn to use her trunk with skill and precision, picking up branches, stripping leaves, even playfully spraying water at the other calves. She saw her form deep bonds with the other elephants in the herd, particularly with Njeri, who loved her with a fierce protectiveness that reminded Elena of how her own mother had loved her. She saw Amara become whole again, not unchanged by loss, but strengthened by it in ways that made her more compassionate, more aware, more fully alive. Years passed. Elena's hair started showing threads of silver. Scout began to slow down, his muzzle turning white, though his enthusiasm for visiting Amara never diminished. And Amara grew into a magnificent young adult, her body filling out, her confidence evident in every movement. She had become a valued member of the herd, learning from Njeri how to be a matriarch in training. And then one visit, when Amara was 7 years old, Elena arrived to find something new. Amara came running to the gate as always, but this time she was not alone. Pressed close to her side, moving on unsteady legs, was a tiny calf. A baby elephant no more than a few weeks old, with skin that still looked impossibly soft and ears that seemed too large for his small head. Elena's hands flew to her mouth. Mama Tembo, now well into her 70s but still going strong, came to stand beside her with a knowing smile. "She gave birth 3 weeks ago," the older woman said. "A healthy male. She's been an excellent mother, just as we knew she would be. She remembers what Njeri taught her." Amara brought her calf right up to the fence where Elena and Scout waited. The baby, curious and fearless in the way only the very young can be, reached his tiny trunk through the fence toward Scout. The old border collie, gray-muzzled and moving stiffly but still sharp-eyed, gently touched his nose to the baby's trunk. And Amara rumbled, a sound of contentment and pride and love that seemed to encompass everything they had been through together. She was showing Elena her baby. She was sharing this joy with the family that had saved her life, the unlikely collection of beings who had taught her that love could survive loss, that families could be chosen, that hearts broken by grief could heal and grow and create new life. Elena knelt down and reached through the fence to gently touch the calf's soft skin. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Amara. He's absolutely perfect. What are you going to name him?" Of course, Amara couldn't answer in words. But as the baby nestled against his mother's leg and Njeri approached to stand protectively over both of them, Elena understood that names were less important than this moment, this culmination of everything they had been through. This proof that love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in the natural world. Scout, who had been the bridge that saved Amara's life years ago, lay down in the grass with a contented sigh. His work here was done. Amara was not just surviving, she was thriving. She was a mother. She was part of a herd. And she had never forgotten the family that had loved her through her darkest days. As the sun began to set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in the golds and oranges that always reminded Elena of that first terrible day, she sat on the ground with Scout's head in her lap and watched Amara with her calf and Injeri, 3 generations of elephants bonded by loss and love and the extraordinary resilience of the heart. Mama Tembo brought chai tea and sat beside her. "You did a good thing," the older woman said quietly. "You gave her a chance when no one else could. You loved her enough to let her go. And now look at what that love has created." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her mother had been right about so many things. Love doesn't end when someone dies. Transforms, adapts, finds new expressions. Her mother's love lived on in how Elena had cared for Amara. And now that love had generated new life, had created new bonds, had rippled forward in ways that would continue long after Elena herself was gone. Amara's calf, emboldened by youth and curiosity, tottered over to the fence again. This time he pushed his whole head through the bars, trying to reach Scout. The old dog lifted his head and gently licked the baby's forehead, a gesture of welcome and blessing. And Elena understood that this was how healing worked, not in a single dramatic moment, but in thousands of small gestures over time. Each kindness building on the last. Each connection creating space for new connections. Each act of courage inspiring more courage. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, bright and infinite over the African landscape, Elena made a decision. She would write down Amara's story. She would tell it to anyone who would listen, not because it was extraordinary, though it was, but because it was true. Because people needed to know that grief was not the end of the story. That family could be built from broken pieces. That love, real love, survived every loss and blossomed into forms we could never imagine until we lived them. Scout's breathing had become slow and deep, the sleep of an old dog who had earned his rest. Amara stood in the distance with her family, the herd gathering for the night, their massive forms becoming shadows against the darkening sky. And Elena, sitting on the ground between two worlds, felt at peace for the first time since her mother's death. The pain was still there. It would always be there. But it had been transformed into something else. Something that looked like purpose, like meaning, like love that refused to be contained by the boundaries of species or time or even death itself. She would come back in 2 weeks. And 2 weeks after that. And for as long as her body allowed. She would be part of Amara's extended family, watching that baby calf grow, perhaps seeing him have calves of his own someday. The story would continue, rippling forward through generations, a testament to the day a grieving woman and a patient dog taught a heartbroken elephant that life, even after devastating loss, could still be breathtakingly, impossibly beautifully worth living. And somewhere, Elena liked to think, her mother and Amara's mother were watching this unfold, proud of what their daughters had become, grateful for the love that had saved them both. Because that was what mothers did. They loved you through the grief. They showed you how to keep going. And when they could no longer be there in body, their love persisted as a force that shaped everything you became. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and 3 species slept peacefully under their light, bound together by the strongest force in the universe. Not survival, not instinct, but love. The kind of love that says, I see your brokenness, and I will sit with you in it until you are ready to stand again. The kind of love that says, you are not alone even when you feel most lost. The kind of love that transforms tragedy into triumph, loss into legacy, and endings into new beginnings that honor everything that came before. This was Amara's story. This was Elena's story. This was Scout's story. But more than anything, it was a story about what becomes possible when we choose to stay. Care. To love. Even when loss has taught us how much loving can hurt. It was a story that proved beyond doubt that families are not just made by blood or even by species. They are made by the moments we choose to show up for each other. by the patience we offer when healing takes time, by the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, even when today has broken our hearts. And that story, like all the best true stories, had no real ending, just a continuation, rippling forward through time. Touching lives in ways big and small, reminding anyone who needed to hear it that love, real love, never dies, just keeps growing, keeps changing form, keeps creating new families from the pieces of old ones, until the whole world is connected by invisible threads of compassion that bind us all together under the vast African stars.